The following is intended for informational purposes only. It is intended to supplement classroom training and documentation. It should not be relied on as a replacement or substitute for classroom training with a live expert instructor. Welcome to Lesson 10, Working with Required Form Fields. We'll show how there are different ways to create a field or a section within a form as required. And there are different methods to do so based upon the underlying business object or using a form rule. We will basically use this to update our individual income form so that we can actually force input into specific parts of our form so that you can't save or you cannot validate unless you've actually filled information, whether it's on our personal details or tax details section. We'll show how we add and use these form rules. Let's look again at our form and create a new one. I want to highlight an aspect of what is considered and how we define required fields. Okay, so let's say I try to save this form. As we know, we get this message saying that the receive date is missing. And now we try saving again. And now we get a new message coming back saying that last name is missing. So I've actually made some changes to the form type to make the last name required on the business object itself, so that you can't even save the form without defining the last name. So let me now go to the personal details, put in the last name, and try to save. Now we can save. Now I added some other required fields, not on the business object level, but on the rules based on the a form rule, which defines, which checks for all different checks, including required fields. So if I validate now, you'll see that we have some new messages coming up. It's going to be moved to the suspense state. And we have messages that first of all, we have messages saying that sections are needed, that the section tax details is missing. So let me fill in that information. First of all, I need to move things to edit. And let me fill in some values there. I'm only going to do as much as what the form seems to ask me. And let's say I save this. Now, first of all, I need to add in, it won't let me save until I put in a change reason. Now I can save the form. And until we validate, we will still have the message saying required section is missing, even though I've actually made the change. This little warning tells you that the exception may be out of date. This one is out of date, and if I validate now, that one should go away because I now have a required section. But I do still have other errors coming up. Okay, so now I'm going to actually edit and fix these other messages. So first of all, I'm going to fill in, I don't know, even though this is not required, I'm going to add in a name, I'm going to add in a social security number, and you see that they are highlighted in red to help you find the required fields. And now, when I hit validate, these three messages should go away. And lo and behold, it's now moved to the posting state, to ready for posting, and the calculations has also occurred for the tax amount. Now, where have we defined those required fields? So let me show you where that's been done. If I go to my form type, first of all, we saw actually 3 different types of required fields there. First of all, we saw required based on the actual BO, on the business object itself. So if I go to my sections and lines, let's do one at a time. I'm going to go down to my tax details section. Sorry, I meant my personal details section. Then you will see that the last name has required on save as well as required via rules. And if I click on it, you will see which actual setting I edited. And it's this one, the BO applicability. And this means basically that on the business object itself, I make this field required, and therefore I can't even save it until I actually have a value. This is opposed to having rule applicability, which you see is the second type of required, which actually allows you to save, but only creates an error when we do validation. And that is the, for example, the ID type and ID net number was set to be required via rules only. So the last name was set to be required on save, also required by rules, but we never even got there because the required on save stops you doing anything until you have that value. And then we have ID type and ID number, which are required by rules. Now, I didn't make any changes to these two. So, in fact, we should be surprised that we got some of these errors on the line coming up, which we didn't see previously. And that's because it's not sufficient to define required by rules or required in the sections. You also need to set your rules and add in your validate step here, check required lines. And this is a different form rule that we didn't previously have, which I just added in, which uses form line configuration validation. There's lots of configuration based on lines, and one of them is for the actual line if we set it to be required by rules. Okay, you can look at the help here, which gives you more information. Now, the other type of validation that we see, that required fields, was as opposed to on the business object level, and also on the lines, you can also define a section to be required, and you saw that in the case of the tax details. So if I go to my main section, again, and look at my sections, you will see that the tax details is being set to be required. And it's the same form rule which tests for the lines will also check whether there is a required on the section. So that's why we got an error coming back for the section tax details. We didn't get an error coming back for the personal details, even though that section is also set to be required, was because the first error that occurred was related to the BO applicability, meaning that you couldn't even save anything until we have a tax, until we have a last name. So once you had a last name, then the section had been filled out, so you didn't get the error related to personal details section. You only got it for the other lines that were missing. Okay, so this is just a quick look at the different types of required fields that we have, basically on the actual BO level, or where we have it just controlled by form rules, and then you can actually have form rules for the lines and also for the sections. So what have we learned in this lesson? Well, we've looked at different types of required fields, and we've seen that there's required both on the section and also on the lines. If a particular line is required by the business object, then you will be unable to save the underlying the data to the business object, to the database, unless actually it is being added, whether there is a value. Supposed to, if you actually required only by form rule, then even if you've actually set that, it will not it won't actually work. It won't actually require you to add a value in yet until you've actually added in the specific form rule, which is the form line configuration validation, which invokes this particular functionality. So just because you've set required by form rule, that's not sufficient for the actual particular field to be required until the form rule itself has been added.